everyone. Mr. James O'Neill here, speaker and owner of Mastery for All. Mastery for All partners with school districts to bring mastery of mathematics through professional development, through coaching, and through consulting. I want to see everybody master mathematics, specifically our Black boys who have historically not mastered it in this space. And so one day I was literally on LinkedIn and there was this article titled, "Is Math a Racist Subject?" And I read that article and I said, I want to do a podcast on that. And so I'm bringing in my friends, people that I've met in the space, people that actually have reached out to me and say, hey, I want to speak to this subject about equity. And so I did not prompt them in their answers. They are literally speaking from their experiences, from the research as it relates to equitable instruction in mathematics. So I want you to sit tight. I want you to have an open mind, an open heart, an open spirit to listen and to hear these experts speak to this subject. Is math a racist subject? And I'm going to see you on the other side. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Is Math a Racist Subject? This is episode 7 of the podcast Mastery for All with Mr. James O'Neill. I am here with a wonderful, wonderful intellect by the name of Antwan Allen. Antwan, how are you doing today, sir?
Great, James. Great to be with you.
I'm so glad you agreed to hop on. I've been reaching out to many of my colleagues, and I'm just like, I got to get Antwan on and all of his brilliance. So as you all know, if you've been listening to the podcast, I always start off telling you all about the person that is bringing their intellect. I didn't come and pull somebody off the street. I just want to let you know these are people that's been out in what we call these math streets for a while now, doing this work, lifting up this work, and doing it in an impactful way. So here is Antwan. Antwan Allen is the Dean of Teacher Preparation at Relay at Graduate School of Education. In this role, he supports the content department chairs for the secondary grades, is the lead designer for foundational coursework in culturally responsive and inclusive practices, and takes a leadership role in evolving the Relay curriculum over time. Previous to Relay, Antwan was a middle school math and science teacher, shout out to middle school, and school leader in New York City. He is passionate about the practice of coaching teachers and leaders and fostering equity in mathematics instruction. So everybody, let's give it up for Antwan Allen. Woo, 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 woo. Yes, sir. So I'm glad to be with you today, Antwan, and you're with me. Really talking about this. This is the 7th episode where I'm asking people, is math a racist subject? I've interviewed several people, different races, different sex, genders, every perspective, middle school, K-5. And so I'm glad to be with you today. And so I just want to hop in like I always do and ask you your thoughts on, is math a racist subject?
Man, James, when you first shared the topic, it really pushed me like, think about, okay. So I'll answer this in 2 ways. Math as a subject is not inherently racist, right? Math is an object. And I think when we look at race in our culture and society, things become racist when we attach power, when we attach status, when we make others less and others more, and that's what creates inequities, right? So when we talk about the subject of math, it's formulas, it's patterns, it's a language that actually is universally accessible to everyone in its natural form. It's evidenced in the fact of how many cultures throughout history have used and advanced math in impactful ways, particularly indigenous cultures, African cultures, Latin American cultures have used and evolved math. It's the practices that we've used over time, particularly as we become more focused on math as this objective practice with there's one right way to get an answer. And if you don't get that answer, then you're bad and you're wrong. Those perspectives and mindsets around math is what has led to disparities in this idea of I'm a math person and I'm not a math person. And I think the root of issues of inequity and racism in math come with the ways in which we teach it, not in the subject in and of itself.
Got you. Okay. Okay. So from what I hear you say, you're saying no. The subject, the core of the subject. And I love the fact that you talked about the accessibility of this that spans all cultures, all races throughout the age of time. It is how, and I wrote down, things become racist when we attach power to these things. So explain to people that are listening how has math been used as a power move in our culture? And you can speak to other cultures as well, because when you said, and I love the way you phrased that, things become racist when we attach power, and you talked about access as well. What has that looked like as it relates to math and education?
Yeah, and there's a lot of research around, looking at math education and its relationship in the United States to our race to advance in space exploration, right? And so we saw other countries having advancements. We're like, wait a minute, why are we doing those things? It made us take a critical look at like, how are we teaching and developing math? And out of that research came, we need to enhance our math programs, but we need to teach math in ways that create people to do jobs, to do math in their jobs. And so a lot of that then resulted in a reductionist way of teaching math. We give you the most efficient rule to solve this particular problem because that input-output relationship is what you're asked to do in a job.
Wow.
And so when we think about math through the lens of preparing people to do jobs, many of which were industrial jobs, right? You create, and this is where I'll lean into a lot of into Zaretta Hammond's work, is this concept of math being individualistic as opposed to collective. Right. And we talk about individualistic cultures versus collective cultures and that impact and how most of the world is collective. Right. And so it's in that collective viewpoint of math that we understand the language of math, the patterns, the communication, the thinking, the multiple pathways, and the sharing of ideas. But we become, in the 20th century United States, really focused on this more individualistic pathway of, you've got to do math to get an answer. And if you don't get the answer, then you don't have value when it comes to doing it.
Wow. And that I've never heard that unpacked like that, especially how when you said we have reduced it to doing it for jobs. So the efficiency of saying this is the most efficient way to get the answer, which leads itself to more a procedural way. And that's why I believe growing up in a classroom, why we were in rows, this whole individualistic thing, the way math was presented to us, the teacher stood up. And I've talked to several colleagues and many of us that identified as a great math teacher, at math student, was because we could mimic the teacher and get the answer and get it fast because that was rewarded. There wasn't this whole process of thinking through and everything. You gave me the information. I took the information. I copied it so that I can get the input and the output that you got. I really appreciate you expounding a bit. Go ahead.
And James, like that what you were sharing, like that's been most of our experiences as students who are now becoming math teachers. And I think it's the difference between 20th century schools and 21st century schools, right? Like we're thinking about at one moment in time in our history, we were developing people for industrial jobs.
Right.
But now, and that efficiency worked for a moment in time. But now we are, if we are developing our students to be leaders and creators, right? To your point, that's where we need the creative thinking, the critical thinking that oftentimes has been missing in mathematics teaching.
Yeah, yes. Like, and as you are talking, I'm just literally reflecting on my journey to becoming an educator. It was when it seemed like the way that I learned math was all good until I got out of college and started teaching the class. And I was like, where y'all books at? Like, y'all don't have books. They had workbooks. And I'm just like, I'm used to opening a book, reading the text, going through, doing the problems. And so I started to see a shift then. And then there was a shift. I started going to workshops and they were just like, yeah, we want to explain the mathematics to students and have them this inquiry-based learning and the discovery. And I'm just like, I never discovered anything, and now you want me to answer why when I presently don't know why myself. So, and I know why I didn't know why, because it wasn't about the why, it was about the end result of the answer.
And that's the journey that we go on, have as math teachers.
Yeah.
And part of a lot of the work in, how we structure curriculum at Relay is that understanding that, look, you're not a bad mathematician or wrong or anything. Like, how we learn is not aligned with what our students need right now. And I went through a similar journey, right? I was really good in math, right? I say that in quotation marks, right, because I was objectively told I was good in math because I could get the answer quickly and mimic back and get 90s on a test where I had to do a bunch of problems that actually did involve a lot of critical thinking. I think back to even some of our workbooks that we used as we were in school, like, there was no critical thinking involved because everything involved the same exact process. So once you knew the process, you literally sat there mindlessly doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And it was actually in my elementary teaching methods course. And I'll never forget, like, I'm so thankful to this day to Dr. Jolene Rimillard, who was my math professor, because she was the first person to open my eyes, like, math are a bunch of patterns. Like, I got to math in college, took my calculus class, barely passed it.
Wow.
I didn't understand what was happening. And my strategies for efficiently getting the answers didn't work anymore. And so I was like, okay, I got my one math class, I'm done. I took statistics in college thinking, oh yeah, this is not math, this is cool, this is easy. So that's not really math. And then I got to my elementary master's program, and she's like, we're going to talk about the patterns behind everything. Like, we're going to look at each of these strands, and we're going to look at the patterns. And my mind was blown. I was like, oh, wow. And so it started this self journey of, I need to go through the curriculum and use curriculum that is a more inquiry-based and does promote the understanding of the patterns, because that's how I'm going to learn. And all the things that I loved about statistics, that was because I saw patterns applied in real situations for real problems.
Right.
Statistics is math, and that's what we need to spend more time with as well.
Yeah, I like the journey. I love hearing people's journey as to when they discovered, like, oh, there's more than this, and to actually equip teachers. You had a teacher, you had a professor. I had a professor in college, and I just talked about this in the last episode, Dr. Lee Stiff, who was a Black man that I did not even know who was president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, like the national president, wrote books and everything. And I remember stepping into that class one day, and we were all there, being our middle school and high school math, going through our track in our junior year. And he asked us, why does A squared plus B squared equal C squared? I mean, he asked us why. And I was like,
because it does.
I don't know. I just know how to use it. The efficiency, right? I know how to find the missing side. I know how that's the whole purpose of why it was given to us of a right triangle. I don't know why it works. And when I tell you he made us feel so small in that moment, but it was the first time where I was challenged to understand why. And when I became a teacher, I went through the same process like you. Like, because I was exposed to that why, I was like, I want to know why for everything, because that discovery and understanding and that connection, it made it more meaningful in that moment to me, because I knew why this worked. I solved the mystery, the puzzle, if you will. And that's one of the things I definitely love about that math. Anything else you want to say about that?
No, I think that it's pushed me to think about how do we then foster that in our students.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So like my first teaching job was in an all boys middle school in New York City that was geared towards recruiting academically talented men of color from public schools, charter schools, parochial schools, and who were various range of experiences in their own schools, but had demonstrated some academic ability up until that point, or strengths in school, and to bring them into an environment that challenged them academically, created a positive social environment.
Got you.
That really kind of spoke to a holistic view of teaching. Making sure that head and heart, that we're teaching to both the head and the heart, to developing brotherhood. And so it was my first teaching job, and I was like, oh, great. I get to teach math to fourth and fifth graders who, up until that point, right, they've been told they've been good at math, right,
Yeah.
because they've been following the rules. And so a lot of my journey was, okay, let's use inquiry to like understand the patterns behind fractions. Fractions, like, one of the first time when many students start to experience challenges in math, they have to start thinking about fractions. And what does that mean? Because to that point, we've been told that everything that we do to numbers makes numbers larger.
Yeah.
Right? Larger or smaller, right?
Right.
Especially, and then we're like, oh, wait a minute. There are things in fractions, when I do them, it does the reverse. What does that mean? What is that? And so the idea of inverse starts to become more important ideas for them. And so I was like, got to do this inquiry approach. And then, and so this is what really strikes me about the Common Core, which is like, aha, I went all in on an inquiry-based curriculum. Great. My students could talk about ideas, they could see the patterns. But then in reality, they had to sit down and solve problems. And sometimes they then didn't have access to the most efficient strategy for solving problems. And they would spend a lot of times using their intuitive knowledge to try to solve problems that actually were more efficient strategies. Mm-hmm. And that's why I had to learn that idea of balance.
Yeah.
Right? Like I went all in and use your natural strategies, validating those. Yes, absolutely. That's how you can get the answer without bridging it to, okay, here's how your strategy aligns with these other two strategies, right? My goal as a math teacher is to help you see the connections between those strategies and then pick the one that makes the most sense in the situation that you're in.
Got you. Yeah.
And so that was really an eye-opening moment for me when they got to a sixth grade teacher who definitely was had a much more traditional approach to math and teaching math. But the reality was they also had to do standardized tests and they weren't equipped for those. And so, I think that for me, you started to think about unpacking the racist ways in which math may have been taught.
Yeah.
It really is going too far in either direction is not going to benefit our students.
Right.
There needs to be that balance,
Most
which
definitely.
is where the shifts in Common Core come in. Conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and application becomes so important because you need all three to be a great mathematician.
Yeah, and I love the fact that it's attending to them with equal intensity, right? Like it's not
Mm-hmm.
just leaning towards one that we are more comfortable with. Like you don't go all the way conceptual that they never see procedures, they never get to apply the concepts that they're learning. Don't stay in these procedures, and they never know the why of the meaning of it. And so I do appreciate that approach and understanding that there needs to be balance. Like even though you may have a preference, there needs to be balance. One thing that you just shared is and I love the fact that you got your first teaching job at an all boys school, specifically with our Black and brown boys. And my goal in my business is to support all by supporting specifically our Black boys in math education, because statistically, when we look at any of the data across the country, that if that dot down there at that bottom of proficiency usually represents someone that identifies as a Black boy. And so my goal is to say all is not exclusive, but we can't say all if we don't include the most vulnerable demographic in these schools, in most schools in America, are Black boys. And so I want to dive into your experience in teaching during that time, this inquiry-based learning. So here's my question for you. What are your thoughts concerning why historically Black boys, and you were access to Black and brown boys at the time, why are Black boys performing so poorly in math? What has been your experience, your research, your understanding, just your brilliance around that?
And there are many who are performing well, right? And
Yeah.
so when we're looking at groups and demographics of numbers, I think I start with those numbers are also reflective of other trends in schools, right? So when you look at
Speak
who
to
spends
all of
more
it.
time out of the classroom,
Yeah.
right? We are talking about uh, Black and Latinx students who are spending more time out of the classroom. So that's going to impact scores, right? And so I think about math, teaching, learning, instruction as part of this more global system of like, how are we creating schools that are responsive to our students? So that's why when we think about restorative justice practices, when we think about um, building school and family partnerships, when we think about all the things that make schools communities that help students feel safe and validated, that was the start. That was the school. Like that was the foundation of our work when I started working at my first school. Is we can't teach anything if our students don't feel cared for, safe, and that they built a community with one another.
Can you say
So I
that one more
start
time for the people that need to hear it again? We can't do what?
we can't teach students unless we build communities where they feel safe, seen, valued, and cared for.
Yes, sir.
And so that was number one, right? And that was the understanding. Couldn't get to the math unless they felt the relationship. And so this is all rooted in like how are we building, like this is where culture responsive teaching becomes so critical. And then we can talk about the math. So now let's talk about the math. It came back to really thinking about our approaches and setting it up to we I think it's linked to research shows that in general, boys tend to be more responsive to more active and tactile ways of learning, particularly when they're in late elementary and early adolescence,
Yeah.
right? Aha, fourth grade, fifth grade, middle school, right? The times when we start to see this discrepancy in student performance, boys and girls, right? It's literally third grade where students are doing well, and then all of a sudden we start to see this divide,
Yep. They start to go separate way. Yes, sir.
right? And so we're taught there's a whole host of things that go into that. Those become our testing grades, right? Those become so it's systemic, but at the end of the day, we lose the emphasis on the thinking, the processing, the communication, the active part of doing the math. And so that happens at fourth, fifth, sixth grade. Students become totally turned off to math. And then they make the decision, I'm a math person or I'm not a math person.
Yeah. And that decision stays with them. It is something that is hard, that fixed mindset as it relates to that. It's hard to turn that thing. Keep talking. Yeah.
Yeah. No, totally. And so that's where the leaning into different methods of conceptual understanding. So I use a lot of games in my classroom, right? So like finding equivalent fractions became a game of Go Fish, right? Like we had
I love it. I just literally saw the kids playing it in my head. And I haven't been in your classroom, but I started smiling because I just saw the whole concept of Go Fish with fractions. Yeah. I love it. Yeah.
And it's like, what am I trying to get you to do? I'm trying to get you to see the relationships and to do the work. I can do that in a way that's engaging and fun and collective, right? I can give you a worksheet or I can give you a game. Understanding the skill that I want you to develop or the concept I want you to know. Once I know that as a teacher, then I can think about, am I going to do this in a way that's individualistic or collective? And what's my purpose? And so that really became a lot of the work behind investing my boys in math, was leaning into the conceptual approaches and then when possible, leaning into the games and the conversation. They love debating. So when I was like, solve a problem, choose any method you want, and then had my students come up and say, present your work. What's good about it? What would you do differently? How does that strategy compare with your strategy? What would you change? Right? He had whole conversations around one problem that shaped and developed their understanding. Guess what? People saw themselves as mathematicians because anyone could access that conversation because everyone did something to solve the problem.
Right.
And so what are the entry points? What are the opportunities to be collective? I think those experiences definitely impact math. And it's interesting. I ran into, so the students who I taught are now anywhere between the ages of 25 and 30.
Isn't that wild?
My first group of students just turned 30.
Yeah.
And I ran into one of them at a reunion. I'll call him LB.
Okay.
LB honestly was at that age, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, the most brilliant and creative math thinker I had ever encountered. He would come up with strategies for problems and take strategies and then extrapolate them in ways that even I as a teacher was like, ooh, let me think about that for
a minute. What are you doing? How'd you get that?
What are you doing? How does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think back to the moments that there were moments where even I like invalidated his thinking because either it wasn't as efficient as I would have liked, or maybe even I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
Right. But LB, he brilliant math thinker. He went to middle school, same school, but in a much more traditional, like, here's the rule, here's the shortcut, here's the algorithm, do it. And I was like, I thought, like, this kid's got to be doing something related to engineering. Like, he loved math so much. Yeah. And he was like, honestly, I stopped liking math in middle school and I just continued in high school because all the joy was sapped out of it. Mm. And I was like, wow. Right. And you know, his experiences in math stripped away his natural curiosity, his creative thinking, his ability to think about problems in really complex ways.
Yeah.
And I think about my students like LB as I train teachers. How do we make sure that we are cultivating that love, that joy of math? And And knowing that actually, and this is why I love middle school, there's a lot of research that shows adolescent years is actually where students can have formative experiences in math. And so if you view if you view yourself as someone who's not a math person, let's say, with the right entry points, right support, the right teachers who are able to unearth that thinking and pattern and joy for math, people have shifts in how they think about math. And so
I totally agree because I've seen it over and over and
talk about
over
it.
again in middle school. I think when I think about that, I think about why I became an eighth grade. I stayed in eighth grade for the 15 and a half years I did in a classroom. I was 14 of them were in an eighth grade classroom. And I thought about the teacher that literally pulled me out of a seventh grade math class when I got into eighth grade and invited me to Algebra 1, which was the accelerated version of math. And in eighth grade, my life shifted forever. And when I look back on it now, I don't think things are coincidence. That's my belief. Like, I know that I was called to this eighth grade, that grade, because it is for me such a transition grade. They're about to go to high school. And this is it's almost like I was playing, I'm going to catch you and I'm going to shift that thinking right before you enter into high school, because I know it's imperative that you believe that you can do math. And so many of my kids were just like, I didn't like it before this class. I didn't like it. I didn't understand it. And the reason why, and there's one thing that I love, how you plan out the story and really talk about kids and grasping it. The reason why they didn't like it, because they didn't get it. And it's not something that, in my entire essence in class, it's like, y'all, this makes sense, so much sense that you're going to get it. Like, because it's not this abstract thing, like we're pulling stuff from the sky. No, it's all connected. And the reason why it makes sense for us to do this step, because we make sense of the previous step beforehand. So like, it's all about the sense making and the puzzle solving and getting that aha moment where it connects, and the endorphins and the physiology of our brain shifting and molding into making those connections is a beautiful thing and a beautiful feeling.
And that is where that connects back. Everything you name connects back to, how do we engage, boys in math?
Yeah.
Right. This idea that right there, that you are building connections that make them excited and see the tap into the ways in which they naturally want to connect with content.
Right.
Which then builds the identity. And to your point, that serves all students, right? It doesn't just serve boys, right? But I can't help to think that, we focus in on, well, what do girls need in math? What do boys need in math? All students need in math access, the ability to develop critical thinking, and someone that says that you can be good at this.
Yeah.
Right? And so...
And that's everybody.
That's everybody.
Everybody. And some people get more access to that than others. But if everybody has access to that, it will shift who can and who doesn't show up on a standardized test, or who feels like this culture can do it as opposed to that culture. Sorry to cut you off, but I love
no.
Yeah.
So here's where we get into culture, right? Because like in a lot of my research, like I've studied, well, what do math programs look like in Asian countries?
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that, well, Asians are just naturally good at math.
Talk about it, because I know right where you're going, because I've done some research there too. Yep.
No, it's because in the history of if you go to Asian countries performing well in math nationally, they've been looking at conceptually based mathematics for decades. And so it is rooted in there. So while we're focused on procedures for an industrial nation, right, they're developing math programs that are rooted in actually the science of how people learn math effectively. And so it doesn't mean that someone who's Asian is inherently and naturally better at math than someone who's not. It is the fact that education systems and the ways in which generations of people are thinking about math are aligned in ways that actually are aligned with how people learn mathematics effectively.
Yeah, yeah. Actually align with how the brain makes connections and makes meaning, and why it is retained easier if there is meaning behind what I'm doing and connectivity. And so, of course, when stuff makes sense, it's going to be like I look like I'm better at it. But it's what it's getting back to your point. It is what's been accessed, like what I have access to, and what the educator or the teacher or the facilitator is, how it is presented to me. And when it's presented in that way, I then make sense of it. And of course, because it makes sense, I say this all the time, because it makes sense, it makes sense. It's just like it works.
And I can access it more fluently.
Right.
It makes, especially as I now become an adult, like I don't actually think about like how I got there because I've been thinking about it for so long.
Yeah.
And it's made sense for so long that that's where it feels like, oh, I have it and I'm this math person and someone else isn't. And so that's one of the biggest things in terms of no, I'm gonna stop there because I lost my train of thought. You said something, I was like, and then it'll come back to me.
It will. It will.
Just the idea that we got to help people make the connections. And that's what it was.
Okay.
As teachers, right, we have to think about how we understand and build and build that, because it goes back to, we don't know how to do that for our students because we don't know that for ourselves.
Yes.
And so that is what we're combating. We're talking about the system of educating math teachers to educate math students. That is a huge piece of what we need to do to improve math instruction, is to improve our teachers' conceptual understanding of mathematics.
Yes. And I'm going to come back to that because I want to go here because I love hearing everybody's take on this question. And I know we've been talking about math and two Black men that love math, and we're not these token brothers. We're not these, oh, y'all are different. No, somebody gave us access. Somebody believed in us. Somewhere along the way, somebody looked at us and said, hey, you get the same access. And we believed and we stepped into it. Just like I've seen so many of the students, like you've seen some of the other students that may look like us, may be of the same race, but see all students step in that. Okay, pull away from that, James. Get to your question. So I want to know from you, why is the mastery of mathematics so important?
So when we think about solving some of the most common issues in our everyday lives, right? It involves understanding something about mathematics that helps us make decisions, right? It could be something as simple as, how do I plan out my day, right? How much time do I need to spend in this, and in that, and in the other? Cooking, right? Easy, simple example. Like I'm a great cook, and I learned cooking by like my mom just shakes and measures and pours and but I couldn't do that at first. I had to measure things out. I had to figure it out, right? And so in very basic ways, we encounter math. And my folks laugh at me, like people who I go out with, because I'm like, yeah, I'll handle the check. And they're like, well, what's a calculator? What everybody needs? Like, nope, I can do it in my head. I got it. Right. What's the percent? What's the tip? I take it. I find 10%. I double that. There you go. Here's a tip. Here's what we all owe. And there are so many things that are just easier in my everyday life because I can tap into basic fundamental understanding patterns of things in math, especially related to fractions and percents. So that's a baseline. When we start to think about many of the jobs that we're engaged in, right? Particularly jobs that involve creating, problem solving, business, It's data,
Yeah.
right? You need to understand how to access, interpret, and make sense of data in so many different ways, right? That's all statistics. And so when we look at not just math, science, engineering jobs, we look at jobs,
Jobs. Yes.
right? We're no longer like we can get someone to do the numbers, right? We can get someone to do the task. What's needed is someone who can actually think through the task because computers can't think through and look at the human aspects of what might be impacting the results that we're seeing.
Right.
That takes understanding and accessing math. And then we can talk about the quote unquote jobs of the future, right? Where we are leaning into technology development and AI and gaming and virtual worlds and all the things that are possible, coding. All this involves coding, which involves an access to math and science. And so if we're thinking about multiple levels of how we want to develop people into productive, thriving adults who have options and choices, like math is important to all of that.
Yes. Productive, I was writing it down, thriving adults
Who have choices and options.
who have choices and options. And to everybody that I've asked has taken on, it's just, I think I'm going to go through the podcast and find that question and just create buzz. I literally, when you were saying it, because everybody has a different take on it, somewhere saying the same thing, but in a different way to really expand upon why we're saying math, why you think Bill and Melinda Gates are throwing millions of dollars into communities that don't historically have access, giving access, because when you do go through this process of problem solving and making connections and drawing on patterns, and it makes you you begin to evolve in your thinking, which then makes you a better problem solver in your own life, to your own issues, to your own things that may be happening. I see patterns within my life. I think about as I go through my weight loss journey. I'm in another weight loss journey pattern. Why are we here, James? Because of the simple fact that you have not had a trainer the entire time. So what is the new input that you need to put in? You can't do this on your own. Like you start and you stop, you start and you stop. Bring in someone that will hold you accountable. What is that going to do? It's going to cause you to act differently and respond differently because you have a new variable in your results. So your equation has changed. James gets inspired. James starts out and then James falls off. Well, James gets excited. James introduces a trainer. The trainer now changes the end result of what's happening.
Yeah, and that there were things that I started to do early in my teaching related to that, right? How are we thinking about our students about teach them about thinking? And I used to do nows and warm-ups. I had hour-long math periods and 45-minute, like I never was trained to do like a do now and a warm-up, but I was just like, I got 45 minutes of curriculum and an hour to teach. What am I going to do? Oh, so I used to start every class with logic problems. And my students would be like, Mr. Allen, what does that have to do with math?
Explain what a logic problem is, just because someone listening doesn't know.
Yes, thank you, Jim. So they took on different forms, but basically the foundation was students were presented with information and input. And based on that information and a particular outcome, they have to figure out, well, what happened along the way that would lead to this outcome? And so it would what we think about it would be something like logic proofs in geometry, right? This is the start.
Right.
This is the start, prove the end. There are word problems as accessible as third, fourth, fifth grade that apply that same type of thinking in realistic situations. And so my book's hanging out back there somewhere with all the problems in it that I could pull out at any second. But it really primed this thinking of talk with each other about what's the path that you're solving. If this happens, why are you eliminating that choice? Right? It's all about getting your brain to problem solve and think critically.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so that's where the math connection came in. I'm not priming you for the math for the day necessarily. I'm priming you to think.
Woo, yes, sir. I love it.
And once I prime you to think, it puts you in a better place to now think about the math.
Yes, to think through what you're about to happen through now, because the brain is already in this process of making sense. And I think I love that. I love that. I love that. And it's going to lead me to my next question, because I think that's super ingenious for that, because many times, and it's no fault, and I'm not faulting anyone. But when I started to change the way that I thought about math, I realized that I was on a journey that not too many people had hopped on. And it was simply because I was getting kids that never really were asked to think. And when I started, this is before our district had a curriculum, I started going through, I pretty much self-made everything. And I said, James, like, you have to stop giving them the answer. Like, even when we get to exponent rules, like, why, when we multiply exponents, do we add them? I literally brought up like 2 times 2 times 2, 2 cubed times 2 squared, and just expanded it out and said, kids, so what's happened? Give you several. Oh, I see. Like, it looks like we're adding 3 and 2. That's how we end up with 2 to the 5th power. Like, I was so used to saying that here, when we multiply exponents with the same base, we keep the base and we add the exponent, but giving them a chance to think. And when I did that, so many kids would just sit there. And I'm like, y'all, it's in front of your face. And they, in their mindset, is that it can't be that easy. It can't be that.
Yeah.
It can't be that accessible, right?
Yeah.
It can't be that.
Yeah.
Is that all we have to do? Yes. But because, I love it, Antwan, I love it. But because they were not used to thinking, they couldn't make sense of what was right in front of them. And so when we talk about other cultures that have been presented math in a way that they've been thinking through the stuff, it clicks easier, because I'm like, yo, it's 3 and 2 and there's a 5. We're adding the exponents, like, because I'm used to thinking through that. And I love that. So let me get to my question, because I'm getting super excited. But I want to ask you, as I think about the things that you've done in giving kids access, giving students access, what do teachers need to do more of, do less of, as it relates to supporting students in their mathematics journey?
I won't put a number on it. I'm just going to start. Okay, and we'll see how many comes up.
Yep, go ahead.
First, we got to explore our own journeys in math. We have to explore how we developed our identities, what our beliefs and mindsets around math, and how those beliefs are productive and supportive of all students, and what might inhibit some students. Let's
tap into that for a little bit. What does that look like for a teacher doing that? And you can speak to your own journey or the way you necessarily support teachers in doing that.
So we start by having teachers think about their math autobiographies, right? What was your own personal journey in math? And then we make connections to, like, there are profiles of kind of math journeys, and just the understanding that here was my journey, here's what I believe, right? And it's just a matter of understanding my story, naming the things that I believe about what's true to be math, what's true about math, and then accessing the research. Folks like Joe Bowler, folks like Danny Barton and Julia Aguirre talk about math identity, and start to think about, well, what aspects of what I believe are aligned with a positive math identity, and what aspects inhibit that. Understanding, because yes, teacher preparation programs and institutes of higher education prepare teachers, but a significant predictor of how we will teach is how we learn.
Yes.
We're human.
Yes.
So we have to name that for ourselves to make sure that we are unpacking and disrupting practices that may not work for students. So that's one. Understand our identities, beliefs, which are productive, which are not. Second, make sure that we take the time to understand the math that we're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest breakthroughs, I think, now are the number of districts and schools who are moving to the use of high quality instructional materials. Because of the way in which we learned math, it is impossible. I will make this statement. It is impossible for a teacher to design a curriculum on their own that's aligned to the standards and develops that balance of conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and application. Impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And even if we could, that's not where our expertise is, and that's not where we should be spending most of our time, right? We should be spending most of the time understanding the concepts, breaking down what are the different pathways to solve these problems so that I can then support my students in doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So whatever curriculum that we're using, making sure that we're taking the time as teachers to understand the concepts, to understand the different ways of solving problems. And to your point, that we're going back to previous connections that students should be making or can access, because that can all help us give students an entry point and on-ramp into whatever it is that we're teaching. And that's the third thing is, how are you making sure that all students have opportunities to do the work of math? Notice I don't say engage, right? Because sometimes people think that engage means that like, they're like laughing and funny. And it's like, it's good. No, engage is doing the work, right? And doing the work can look like solving a problem on your own. So you're doing some initial thinking before you talk to someone. It can be doing a collaborative problem. It can look a lot of different ways, but are students actually doing the math? And how are we diversifying the ways that we're able to allow them to do that in community and support them, right? Like, productive struggle is not putting something hard in front of students and saying, do it, I believe in you. It is, okay, this might be challenging. I know you need this thing to start. Let me do the thing that you need to start. Because if I get you to start, you're doing the math.
Yeah.
And you're getting to a point where now I'm going to connect you with someone else so that y'all can think together.
Yes.
And people were like, well, how do I know that the student's doing the work for themselves? They'll have opportunities to do the work on their own, but they need to develop the concepts first, right? So the idea that we can't put students together because one student will do more of the thinking than another, that's true if we're giving you procedural problems, right? And I'm waiting for someone else to get the answer and take the answer. But if we're talking about understanding a concept, your way of understanding and my way of understanding are both valid.
Yep. And it could be differently. Yep.
And like that's doing the work of the math.
Yeah.
And that's honoring the individual thinking, and not once you take the thinking of another, it's shaping the thinking of each other.
Yes.
Until students are supported to the point where they can then do it more independently.
Yes. And that is, that's so good. I love the understanding your own math journey. I did not, like you said, like Maya Angelou always quote this: when you know better, you do better, right? But you got to know. And that's why I love the programs that even you being in Relay and be it in front of teachers, because many of us did not know and don't know. Like, we're not signing up to ruin kids' lives. That is not what teachers are doing. That is not, we get into 99.9% of us got into the profession because we wanted to aid and abet our kids to becoming better and greater than we ever thought they could. We want to support that journey. We want to be a part of that journey. And we just love our kids. Like, we love this part. But there can be pieces of what we do, just like in parenting, just like in anything, just like in business, like any partnership, any relationship, that do not, though your intentions are great, your impact is different from your intentions. And I love that in the work that you do, you support teachers in understanding their journey, understanding their content, and how we approach the mathematics. And it's I don't know if you have any more to say, because I have one final question to hear from you concerning that topic.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I want to ask this, and I ask everybody this, because I feel like when people hear you, when they hear us, when they hear the other people that have come on the podcast, you can kind of see like this person is committed to this. Like, it's not talking the talk, like they talk the talk, they walk the walk, they get in there deep to do the work. And so I always ask this final question: what is your personal mission as it relates to advancing mathematics instruction here in the US or worldwide, or what is that personal mission?
So as you mentioned in my introduction, I'm passionate about teaching teachers and leaders. And I think that this work, there's so many different avenues, lanes, arms to do this work in. I think for me, it is about the things that we've been talking about. How do we support teachers and school leaders in knowing and doing differently?
Yeah.
So that way we're developing a generation of students who see themselves as mathematicians and see the beauty, the patterns, the language that is math. Basically, I think we've got work to do in the United States to develop students, develop teachers in ways that other countries have been doing for generations.
Yeah.
And so that's part of my mission, is to do that work, right? To make sure that we are supporting teachers in the learning and the doing and the collaboration that they need, so that then students are set up to, like, again, I go back to the three things that we just talked about. Everyone, teachers, students, leaders, understand our math identities, understand the math content, and then provide access points that help all students do the math.
Mm-hmm.
That's really my goal, is to help everyone be able to do those three things.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Understand your own math identity, number one. What's number two again?
Understand the content.
Understand the content. And what's number three again?
Make sure that students have the ability to do the math.
Make sure that students have the ability, the access to do the math. I love it. I believe that is something that we all can live by in this math community or in our education sphere, no matter where we're at, no matter the content we teach. I have enjoyed talking to you, Antwan. I was about to call you Dr. Allen.
Working on it, James. I'm working on it.
I literally was about to say Dr. Allen. But in the future Dr. Allen, this has been refreshing to my soul, and it's been a great conversation. This is the 7th episode of Is Math a Racist Subject? And the future Dr. Allen said, no, it is not, but how we give power and access to it has become racist here. This is the 7th episode of Is Math a Racist Subject? This is Mr. O'Neill with another Mastery for All episode. Everyone, have an amazing day and do what Dr. Allen said to do. All right. Bye, everybody. Listen, I hope you got everything you needed from this episode. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, do what you got to do to get this message out. As we talk about getting the message out, I would love to extend the offer to work with you and your teachers, whether it be a speaker, whether it be professional development, consulting, or even coaching. I am about that mastery for all life. So I want to extend that offer to you. My information is on the screen. But above all else, I'm super excited that you had space enough to welcome me into wherever you're listening to me at, all right? So I'm super excited that you decided to join me today. Have an amazing day.